Good afternoon. I'm Alan Joines, Mayor of Winston-Salem. It's my pleasure to call to order this Committee of the Whole meeting. I'm going to ask the City Clerk to call the roll, please.
Councilmember Joyner.
Present.
Councilmember Clark.
Here.
Councilmember Andrew Bowen.
Here.
Councilmember Scipio.
Here.
Mayor Pro Tem Adams.
Here.
Councilmember Taylor.
Present.
Councilmember Hall.
Present.
And Councilmember Burke.
Thank you very much. We will operate this Committee of the Whole pretty much like a regular council meeting in that we have two sections of the agenda, consent agenda as well as a general agenda. There'll be no discussion of the items on the consent agenda unless a council member so requests, and we will remove that item and then consider it individually. Items not removed from the consent agenda will be enacted with one motion. We would just go on, and are there any items that a council member would like to have pulled from the consent agenda? Yes.
Item C6.
C6. All right, is there a motion on the balance?
Move for approval of the consent of the balance of the consent agenda.
Is there a second? Second by Councilmember Clark. And by the way, we'll be voting manually tonight, basically. So all those in favor of the motion to approve the consent agenda, please say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? And that's unanimous. We'll now go to item C6.
Item C6, resolution extending the time for Winfield Properties, Inc. to close on the purchase of real property from the city for the purpose of developing the lofts at Motor Road to provide affordable housing.
Councilmember Mayor Pro Tem Adams, you asked for
Yes,
this item.
since this is part of right now our priority one with the city and us doing a better job of communicating anything that happens with these properties that we've already budgeted for or are funding to some degree. Anytime it comes up that we are changing the process or what they're doing, what we first signed up for, if you could give us a brief description of what is taking place. Thank you.
Good afternoon, Mayor Jones, Mayor Pro Tem Adams, and members of City Council. Chantel McClam, Neighborhood Services Director. In this situation, Winfield Properties has asked to extend the time frame in which they signed their agreement with us, and that's due to a couple good things. They actually received a LIHTC award, and it's going to take them some time in order to get the financing from that award completed. They also received a project-based voucher award from the Housing Authority, which is also good because it gives us more affordable units. So there's a couple good things that happened to them at the end of the year as to where they were unable to sign that agreement with us in order to get that other financing in place.
All right.
Thank you.
Make a motion.
I move for approval of item C6.
Second.
It's second by Councilmember Clark. Any discussion? All those in favor of the motion to approve item C6, please say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed, no. And that is unanimous. We'll now move to the general agenda. And by the way, of course, we're not giving final approval tonight. They will go to the full council in about 2 hours or so. So item G1, please.
Item G1, 2025 Food Resilience Planning Report.
Thank you. I think our Assistant City Manager, Wojja, is going to tee this one up for us.
Yeah, thanks. Good afternoon, Council, Mayor Pro Tem. This is the first of two items that will be presented tonight by Dr. Shailene Miller and the Sustainability Department. This first item, the Food Resilience Report, it's an informational item, so we're not asking for any formal approval or decisions. It's meant to be kind of an informational item to highlight the city's ongoing commitment to strengthening the local food system, including some of the collaboration and partnerships with some other local agencies and local partners. So with that, I'll turn it over to Shailene, and she can fill you in on the details.
All right, good afternoon, Mayor Joines, Mayor Pro Tem Adams, and Council. I'm going to do my best to summarize what's a very long report, but that we worked really hard to make a nice short executive summary, but provide the details on the data and the process for anyone who is further interested. So food resilience has been a part of the city's priorities since 2016, but food resilience has a very broad definition. And many stakeholders in this community define it differently. So it can include availability of food during particular events, disaster, COVID, but it's also about accessibility, which is both physical accessibility as related to our food deserts and accessibility on affordability. It also includes food acceptability, whether that is whether people choose it and also whether it is healthy. So a part of that, of food security, is also that healthy food, because unhealthy food environments or unequitable access to nutritious food can lead to poor health outcomes. And it can foster chronic health problems such as obesity and heart disease. It may also be compounded by poor dietary choices and nutrition knowledge. So there are over 55,000 food insecure individuals in Forsyth County, and most of the food data we have comes via the county and they're part of their health services. But we also gathered data from other sources, including Second Harvest Food Bank, which served 41,000 individuals from their programs. 37% of these were under the age of 18, 12% were over 60, and in addition, for the first time ever, the Hispanic Latino population was the largest served at 43%. The highest serving zip codes were 27105 and 27107 in the north and east, southeast, respectively. Seven of the 8 wards in the city has a food desert, which I'll map in a moment. Meanwhile, the impacts of these challenges have broad challenges of this big food desert that's very wide-reaching. And I won't go over one of these for being brief. A food desert is technically an area that's defined by low income and low access, so more than a mile to a grocery store by the USDA. And it's difficult to affect this, really, without opening a full-service grocery store. So there are other ways we have to begin to think about access. For example, this map also shows that ethnic and immigrant food businesses often serve people of color and immigrant populations. Although their contributions are often outside of traditional food access, they are important ways to provide healthy and affordable foods. And in fact, statistics show that ethnic food markets carry 1.6 to 2.6 times higher variety of vegetables and fruits than your typical corner store. So in this case, you can see how the Hispanic groceries do help serve our community. With several of our historical projects having their items completed, their funding over, the hydroponic contract is coming up for renewal. We wanted to take time to focus on where we are and look at the directions for where we might go. So we decided to do some stakeholder engagement, some benchmarking, and planning to solicit feedback. So we began this with identifying a Johns Hopkins tool on municipal governments and food resilience. And then we added in a residential component because this did not have only primary stakeholders and not residents. So for 8 months, we worked on outreach, and for the last few months, we've been writing the report and double-checking several items. So it ended up including partner, nonprofit, and residential surveys and meetings. The resident survey was online, but we also sent interns out into the community with paper, rock the quarry. They stood in lines with our pools to try to get people involved, and several other events. So it resulted in 303 resident surveys completed, and we think it captured the intended audience. You can see that many of them did receive SNAP and WIC benefits or access to food pantries. We also had 4 in-person meetings throughout our food desert areas and in City Hall, an additional one online. We also conducted multiple meetings with the county, health providers, nonprofits, and we even worked through some of the city departments and what they're doing in the food space. So just to share a couple of the items is that you can see that there is still a concern for having the means to purchase food, and there was a lot of concerns about the price of food. Another thing that showed up was important was the distance to get to food. Overall, the community's not agreeing it's challenging, but if you don't have a vehicle, it is very challenging. And that, of course, comes back to our public transit. So big and broad, bringing these main themes together. You've already heard about the first two. So having access to groceries, public transportation barriers, but also education on what the resources are, how to use them well. The concern within the nonprofits was largely about funding, and particularly about the smaller community nonprofits that are reaching directly into the communities, and them being able to be continuous and ongoing. There was also some discussion on those bottom three about how food assistance is provided in the community, the general loss of agriculture and the respect for agriculture, and the communication gap, particularly between partners and that of language access, particularly Spanish. So the community also proposed solutions, although some of these solutions point more towards the community, the county, or partners. For example, while the city is obviously very tied to the transportation solutions, food sovereignty, or the ability for people to make decisions and have choices about their food, is directed more towards those organizations that provide that assistance. Partners in particular asked that the city help expand existing programs and organizations by assisting with funding rather than recreating them from scratch. So we combined this, and sorry, it looks like didn't come out very nicely up here, that the benchmarks from other cities around the nation and from these community suggestions, what possible strategies could the city have? So obviously the first strategy is funding, and that could be directed towards those organizations, or it could be in RFPs to provide specific services. For example, many cities are doing online groceries subsidies, or they're doing mobile grocery services. Another part is planning and zoning. There are ways to help on the side of urban agriculture in particular. And then there are current things that are being done within our transportation that can be guided by having access to grocery stores. And we've already begun meeting with DOT to discuss some of these. Then you also see education and outreach. Again, these are steps that we already started, where I have asked Mariah Gendy, who is our project manager, to begin a newsletter for our partners so that they can connect and reach to one another. We're also starting an education series that will be monthly, inviting those in the community who have the knowledge to do that. And then partnering. So looking to partner with others in the community who are doing this work, apply for grants. We're specifically right now, we're trying to work with the Wake Forest School of Medicine. So one more piece that we did for the benefit of council, we created this cost-effort diagram with the help of the departments that would be involved, and so that it can help as a guide for your visioning and decision-making going forward. And that's all I have, and I'll take any questions or comments you have right now.
Any questions, Ms. Miller?
Comment.
Mayor Pro Tem.
Yes, thank you so much, Doctor. We appreciate this. As you know, this is one of the things when you came to the city, I discussed with you in our meeting that, cities now, like I said, our description of what our job has been, providing services to our citizens all over the country, we now have to take a new look at other services or other partnerships or collaborations that we must involve ourselves in. Our citizens expect that. Since I've been on the council, and the ones that have been here with me, Councilmember Taylor, Scipio, Clark, many, many years, and the mayor, that we have discussed about food insecurity or poor access to food for our citizens, particularly those that live in the qualified census tracts and that don't have the income or the resources. There was always a discussion about, okay, we do economic development, but why is it we don't? I know that when it comes to LIHTC and others, HUD, much like the Choice neighborhood, there has to be componentry and resources wrapped around the community, whether it's transportation, whether it's grocery stores or access to good quality foods. I think that going forward, and I've read the whole report, and I'm going back and read it again. I've highlighted some areas, and I behoove my council member and peers and others to do likewise, please. A lot of great information on the good work that you guys have done in reaching out to the community to get more input, because it's not make-believe. Again, I have nothing against the pantries and the places that give away food, but if you're giving away food that people have no idea how to prepare, if you're giving away food that people don't like because of cultural beliefs and whatever, all of these things you have to take in stride and do our best to do better. So I'm looking forward to our strategic visioning next week because, again, like you said, if you look at the information you provided to the council and the public, other cities realize that you can't claim that you want to improve your poverty rates, education rates, lower crime and violence and trauma if food is not a part of the conversation. And with that, I thank you, your staff, and all of the partners and departments that participated in this work.
Thank you. Councilmember Joyner?
Dr. Miller, one of the things you asked your focus groups about was online grocery. And it was a fairly high percentage that for one reason or another came back that they weren't comfortable with or willing to do that. Mm-hmm. So are you having any thoughts with your group of how to combat that or maybe educate, or how do you plan on interacting with that?
I think the point of that is if we were going to decide that that was one of the ways we wanted to help, we would need to provide, it would need to work with our services for teaching about technology. And we'd also have to work, it's a multi-thing. So you'll see this is one of the effort is very high, even though the cost might be just providing the assistance. The effort's quite high for both educating on that side. There are places where it won't deliver to, so it would be a lot of negotiating on where do you deliver to. And there's a few models. There is the model of simply supplementing it or providing the cost for it. There's also the idea of providing it into certain places like community centers where you could, they could order online and it could be somewhere close by for them to pick up. So there's a few models that could be used if that was one of the options.
Thank you.
Thank you. Councilmember Andrew Bowen.
Dr. Miller, thank you for this report. Read over it, it was great, and I want to thank you for adding the portion about the rise and increase in the Hispanic population that is reaching out to our local food pantries. That's just for some of my own background and knowledge. I actually helped prepare that part of the report, and I would say in about 3 to 4 years ago, those numbers were completely flipped. The Hispanic population was in that third tier, and is over the past few years has skyrocketed to number 1. And that just shows how much we need to do in supporting our Hispanic community and our immigrant population that's coming in here. Because as Mayor Pro Tem mentioned, there's a lot of cultural needs and differences there around food, and I know that is something that's trying to be addressed. And so as we move forward, we just need to look at those cultural differences and those cultural needs, and just do our best to outreach to the population there. So, but thank you very much for this.
Thank you.
Thank you. Councilmember Hall led this effort for us for a few years ago. I know it's exciting too.
Yeah, Mayor Joynes, I appreciate that. If I could just say one thing that I appreciated that was still up here was reviewing that bus bag policy. So we had talked about, and it came up with the Urban Food Policy Council, where we had citizens that were literally trying to make decisions, citizens who were using WISTA to make decisions on how many groceries they could be able to buy and fit into 2 bags before loading back up to get on the bus to go home. And so I'm glad to see that that is still being lifted up, at least in conversation and review. And I, too, was, very excited to see all the great things in the report, and just happy to help move this along.
Thank you. Thank you, Ms. Miller. Any other questions? Thank you very much. This is for information only. We'll be talking more about it in the future, I'm sure. Item G2, please.
Item G2, resolution recognizing intradepartmental collaboration to facilitate natural areas in city parks.
Assistant City Manager Wanja.
Yeah, so this next item, another one from the Sustainability Department. This is also a joint presentation with Leah Friend from Recreation and Parks. So in this item, this is a resolution in front of you tonight, or this afternoon, that will just to formalize the city's commitment to preserving natural areas and parks where feasible and where there are clear ecological benefits. So with that, I'll let Shailene and Leah provide you with more details.
Okay, great.
All right, thank you. So I also want to recognize that this has been sponsored also by Forsyth Audubon, and we have Don Lindell and Dave Zimmer here supporting that, and Carter Berry, the Sustainability Chair, is here as well in support. So this resolution is meant to send a strong and public message that the city values environmental sustainability, natural habitat preservation, and a responsible approach to parks management. So there are several key reasons why this resolution is timely and beneficial. By adopting this resolution, the City Council would reinforce the importance of the natural areas in our park. So what we are doing in the city, however, it is not spelled out. The resolution also authorizes the creation of management plans for these individual parks, providing guidelines for vegetation management and ensuring the institutional knowledge is preserved and passed on. And it improves the management of the natural areas for critical habitats for pollinators, songbirds, and other species. This resolution can also open the door for volunteer groups to participate in the removal of invasive plant species and the enhancement of habitats by planting native and ecologically valuable species, as Audubon has been trying to do. Official recognition of the City Parks Natural Area Program also expands our opportunities to apply for grants that align with this vision of sustainability and ecological priorities. So this resolution is a result of collaboration and consensus, initiating with Forsyth Audubon in the summer. And then it was supported every step of the way. In August, Parks and Recreation staff, vegetation management, sustainability staff, the Sustainability Committee, and Audubon representatives all came together to ensure this resolution aligns with our city goals. Both the Parks Commission on November 12th and the Sustainability Committee on December 5th voted unanimously to support this initiative. So thank you for considering this and your continued commitment to the health of the city.
Thank you. Any questions?
I don't have a question, but I do have
Councilmember Hall.
I do have a comment. Thank you, Mayor Joines. I was going to say that I am really happy to see this. Councilmember Andrew Bowen and I served on the Urban Food Policy Council. Well, I didn't serve. I guess I was staff.
He was like the director.
I was staff, yes. But we talked about the city establishing some sort of organic protocol, and if parks could be one place that we could start that, or that could be started. And so I was really excited to see this and talk to Mayor Pro Tem about how exciting it was to see this here as being a start to maybe seeing that and getting there. But I was really excited to see this. I'm happy about everything that is laid out here. Glad that Recreation and Parks is going in this direction. And so I just wanted to say that publicly and commend you all for doing this.
Thank you.
Mayor Pro Tem and then Councilmember Scipio.
I think this is great, as Councilmember Hall has stated. This has been on our plate for a long time with the creation of the Food Policy Council, and Mr. Michael Banner served on that. This is part of what his dream and a few people then was about. I have no problem with this, but I'll say that often my concern is that just like how we plotted out the land in the city that we could use for building affordable housing, I know it's a big task. If we could find some interns or some students to help put together our park lands and their green spaces. Because, you know, as in your prior report, agricultural land is going away in Forsyth County. We kind of landlocked. We don't have it. And the farms that are still left a lot of those families are selling those properties for the development of housing, which we need that. But we also are losing, as your report prior said, being able to grow food in Forsyth County. We are importing food by the millions of pounds and tons into our county because we're not growing enough food as much as we should. So I would like possibly in the future that we look at what green space areas within our park systems that we could use to create urban agriculture, much like bigger cities or some cities are doing, because it helps with the air, it helps with health, and some other things. It engages the community, and it allows others to be able to participate in growing the food for the community. We're right now trying to figure out, as in your report, how do we get more people, as was quoted, to get their hands dirty in the dirt to grow food. I grow my food, probably 90% of it. I freeze it, can it, dry it, and I do it for health reasons. And I do believe that if we're not providing quality food choices, sovereignty, that food has been grown with pesticides and other things, that we are contributing to the problem. So I'm looking forward to seeing if your staff and groups and partners could collaborate with Wake or, Atrium Novant as to how we bring that into play as well. Thank you.
Councilor Scipio.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I love this report. And I thank you for this. I love the resolution. My concern is intent. What's our intentions versus what we actually implement? My two concerns that I like, if you have to address that today, you can, or let me know how you're going to think about it. One is the use of pesticides and herbicides, that we use a lot of that in our parks right now. And then the question of edible vegetation. Have we considered putting that in the park and educating people about it?
So on the first one, we have recently, in this past year, purchased an industrial steamer with which vegetation management has. And this industrial steamer would allow us to use it to spray weeds without any chemicals. So they are still on the experimental stage with that and pilot. But if it does work, then it saves us both a lot of money in chemicals and makes it a lot safer place to be. So if it works the way it's expected to, it could cover up to 20% of the city with one. If it does, then they'll probably be coming back and asking to buy them for the rest of the city. On the second, we have been in conversations with parks. We have had one possible park identified as being a small arborist for fruit trees that we would try.
Thank you.
Any other questions, comments? Councilmember Hall.
Thank you, Mayor Joines. When Mayor Pro Tem was talking about different organizations and working with, I don't know if you all have worked with them, but Toxic Free NC was one of the organizations that at least was engaged in conversation about being able to develop an organic protocol in some of the parks. And so if there is an opportunity, as you all are developing things, they could be a possible partner to reconnect with. And also support edible landscaping too as an opportunity to grow this out. But really excited. I can't say that enough. I think I've said that 5 times, but I am really excited about this.
Thank you. Is there a motion?
I make a motion.
Councilor Joyner moves approval, seconded by Councilmember Scipio. Any discussion? If not, all those in favor of the motion, please say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? No, and that is unanimous. Thank you very much. Item G3.
Item G3, ordinance amending Article 4 of Chapter 2 entitled Administration.
City Manager Pate.
Thank you, Mayor. This is an item that's been brought back to council went to council and was referred back to Committee of the Whole to look at some additional discussion of what council wanted to do in moving forward with this overall policy. As you know, the 2 employees that you employ, we both have contracts with the council that stipulates how our living arrangements, so it's not impacting us at this point in time. But this policy has been changed several times in terms of looking at how we want to recruit and retain our general workforce. I do think council's made some wise decisions in the past to eliminate some of the strenuous requirements on where people have to live and replace those with opportunities for our workforce to be able to get into the city when they have an emergency, such as our public safety, which have to be able to get in, live within a 60-mile radius, and so that they're available when there is a public safety necessity to have them here, but it doesn't force them to live in a particular place for a variety of reasons that they may have of family property or other needs that might be in their best interest of their family. So those are in place, and right now the council discussion is upon the two positions that you actually hire, and if you want to have requirements that are greater than we do for other senior managers, or if you want to make them more similar to what you do for other senior managers. And in this case, the issue in front of you is really the city attorney's position, but I know that there's been some questions asked me about would this apply to the city manager's position as well. So I think that's a policy decision for council to weigh in on. I think several of you have comments on how you would like to do this or look at this, and I think the two issues there are where the location is and the perceptions of the community of that, and the time frame, and again, perceptions of the community and the other workforce on those numbers or that amount of time.
Any questions for Mr. Pate? Mr. Andrew Bowen?
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. So you said that the right now, you in private, we and I have had conversations about this. Did you say that there is a kind of a state policy around this, or is this just a local policy about the city manager position being within city limits?
For your purposes, this is a part of your code, and I'd have to go back and look at it. I think it might actually be a part of the charter when you went to the council manager form of government for the city manager to reside within the corporate limits of the city. That's probably the only position that's a typical requirement across communities across the United States, quite honestly. But the concept of having residency requirements has been wavering in most places. So as cost of living gets higher and folks have more mobility, the limitation on where people live has become less of an issue for most elected bodies. But I would say in terms of the city manager positions, most of my colleagues do live within the jurisdiction that they work for, except for in a few cases where the cost of living in those communities are really astronomical.
Thank you.
Councilmember Hall.
Thank you, Mayor Joines. I appreciate this partly because it creates some level of congruency. I think for a city attorney, they don't necessarily need to be within Winston-Salem, could still do their job, obviously 30 miles away. But I do appreciate the fact of being able to have a city manager that by way of this action is required to live within the city limits. And so I do appreciate that. One of my concerns before when we talked about this, I think in December in committee, was that there was not a lot of congruency about the positions like department heads, et cetera, that there was a large disparity on what we required of them with residency requirements. So I actually appreciate being able to vote on this.
Thank you. Mr. Manager, this is for information only tonight, is that correct? Or are you?
I think where we're looking for, this is for to determine whether the council wants to move this forward in this format, or, and again, there was a previous item or language that was associated with this as well. So we're really looking for your direction. So it would not come to the meeting. None of these items are going to come to the meeting tonight. So we would be for 2 weeks out.
Okay. So what's the pleasure of the council? Do you want to move this item forward to?
Yes.
Well, I'd take a motion, I think.
I move, well, do we need a motion? I move that we move this item forward to the next council meeting.
Second.
February 2nd, Councilor.
Yeah.
Okay, second by Councilor Scipio. Any discussion? Not all in favor of the motion, please say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed, no. And that's unanimous. We'll take this to the February 2nd meeting then, Mr. Pate. Okay, item G4.
Item G4, information regarding a proposed city sponsorship policy.
Mr. Rowell.
Good afternoon, Mayor Joines, Mayor Pro Tempore Adams, and council members. This item is an information item regarding a proposed sponsorship policy for the city. As part of the annual budget, the city provides sponsorships for various community events, such as the International Black Theater Festival, the Winston-Salem Open Tennis Tournament, River Run International Film Festival, Winston-Salem Cycling Classic, and the Gears and Guitars. These events these sponsorships are funded from general purpose or OXP tax dollars, in particular the OXP tax dollars, because they promote travel and tourism. In addition, we do have departments that often pay small dollar sponsorships out of their budgets for events that align with the service focus of the departments. And in addition, the mayor and council members have provided small dollar sponsorships out of funds that were set aside for community meeting expenses. As an aside, in 2002, the council did authorize the mayor to use funds for community organizations in lieu of receiving a salary. But over the years, management's seen community organizations reach out to departments requesting sponsorships for the same events. And so we feel like it's time to present a policy to provide more guidelines about how the city would provide potential sponsorships. Also, to ensure that these expenditures do meet the public purpose requirement that's established in state law. So the draft policy that is provided with this information item lays out guidelines for how sponsorships could be considered, what the process would be to apply for the funds. The end result would be that an item would be included as part of the budget for you all to approve funding for sponsorships, based on the criteria established in the policy. I'm going to take just a moment to touch on some of the key elements of the policy. So in terms of just the key question that would have to be considered is whether a valid public purpose is being directly accomplished by sponsorship. So in consideration of a monetary or an in-kind donation or sponsorship, there would be two questions that would need to be considered. One, whether that expenditure meets the public purpose test. And again, state statute lays out the public purposes for which cities can spend public dollars. And then second, also ensure that sufficient controls are in place to ensure that the public purpose is being carried out by the event or the organization that receives the funding. In terms of responsibility and authority, in the event that a department or a city official is unsure whether a sponsorship is approved through this policy and must be separately approved by the city council, then the process would require that the department or the city official should consult with the city attorney's office for guidance, again, to make sure that that expenditure meets the public purpose requirement. In terms of some specifics about the policy itself and what the criteria are for what the policy calls an approved policy. Sponsorships on the approved list, the city sponsorships, which shall be created and maintained by the city manager based on approval of the annual budget by the city council. So that would be part of our process going into each budget season, is to provide you all a list of approved sponsorships to be considered for funding. Also, the sponsorship should meet the following criteria: that the sponsorship aligns with the city's core values and enhances the local community in alignment with the current strategic plan, that the sponsorship is related to the typical business or work of the city government, that the organization hosting the event must directly impact the city of Winston-Salem, that the event is not held to promote a political position or figure, that the event is not held to promote a religious message or belief. And then the criteria that an organization to be considered for sponsorship must not meet is that it's a social, a labor union, alumni or trade association, fraternal or political organization, or an organization that serves a limited constituency that is unrelated to a legitimate purpose that aligns with a city goal or value. And then also as an organization or team raising funds on behalf of another benefiting group, for example, walkathons, contests, pageants, ambassador program scholarships. These are just a few of the key criteria of the policy. If a sponsorship does not meet these criteria, then in terms of guidance for departments, they are to seek review and approval by the assistant city manager over that department or the city manager. In terms of sponsorships that require separate city council approval, if a sponsorship request doesn't meet the criteria I just mentioned, or is not approved by the assistant city manager is part of a departmental request, then the item would come to city council for approval prior to any payment being made. And again, as part of that process, bringing an item back to council, the two questions would need to be answered. What is the public purpose being served by the sponsorship, and are there adequate controls in place in order for a sponsorship to be funded? The policy goes on to provide details about the process, and basically if an organization reaches out to the city seeking a sponsorship, then they're to provide it basically an official request on their letterhead at least 30 days prior to the event. And then finally, unapproved sponsorships. The policy states that any payments to organizations that do not comply with this policy or that do not have prior city council approval are unapproved and will be required to be reimbursed by the city personnel or city official who approved the sponsorship. So over the years, the city has provided a varying range of sponsorships, fairly large dollar all the way to small dollar sponsorships. The large dollar ones that I mentioned earlier, like River Run and the International Black Theater Festival and Winston-Salem Open, we do have agreements with those organizations that specify how they're supposed to spend the money, how they're supposed to report the spending of those funds, and also to establish what kind of recognition the city will receive for providing that level of sponsorship. The smaller dollar ones don't have quite that kind of established guidelines. But one note to be made is that the expenditure of city funds on a sponsorship is an endorsement of that event or organization. And so that is part of I think the spirit of this policy as well, is to know that if there's city funds being spent, that is the city organization supporting that event or that organization. Again, as the policy noted, the process would involve presenting an approved list of sponsorships or a list of sponsorships to be approved by City Council as part of adoption of the annual budget. So that's something that we'll be working on as part of our process going forward. But again, this is an information item, so staff is prepared to receive whatever feedback or guidance that you would like to provide to us, and then we'll bring back, if you wish, an item for action at a later date.
Thank you, Mr. Rao. Council members, anybody have a question tonight? Of course, we're going to be providing Ben and others with feedback going forward. But Councilmember Scipio had a question.
Yes, thank you. Just for clarity, there will be an approved list of organizations that we adopt at the annual budget time. Is that right?
That would be a part of the process.
That would be
under
part of the
new
process.
policy. Yes, ma'am.
And those approved lists would be people we have or organizations we have funded in the past, correct?
Certainly, that would be a starting point.
Okay. In the budget, will we have a fixed amount of funds designated for these sponsorships?
So, Councilmember Scipio, I think that is a decision direction that the council would have to provide management in terms of the development of the budget. Certainly, if we start with what's been approved over the years as a starting point, I think if there's a desire to provide sponsorships for other events or organizations, then that would need to be a discussion on the part of council.
I guess my concern is, are we saying that for a group that we haven't funded before, it might be their first time asking us, they probably wouldn't get funded because we didn't set aside funds in the budget?
Well, I think that if an organization submits a request, and under the draft policy, that would be reviewed to see if it meets the criteria, and especially those two fundamental questions: does it meet a public purpose, and would sufficient controls be in place to make sure that the public purpose is being carried out? Now, I would say that just because that organization meets those criteria doesn't guarantee automatic approval. I think that under this policy, if it didn't meet those criteria, then if there was an interest on the part of council to still consider it, then management would bring forward an action for you all to formally approve the sponsorship. But I would say, too, that if it met the criteria, but there's not sufficient funding set aside for it, then there's no assurance that they're going to receive funding. And that, again, means that whether it's an allocation of undesignated funding that council includes as part of the budget, I mean, I think that would be part of the discussion.
So everything in this policy, would you say that every request comes to the council or not? Because I don't think we have approved most of these donation requests as a council.
Correct. No, I think that what this policy envisions is that there would be a list, if you will, of proposed sponsorships to be funded as part of the budget process. So while we haven't worked through all the details of how that would be presented to you all, I mean, I could envision it being a list that you all see and said this would be included in the city manager's proposed budget. And then, there would be discussion about, okay, I mean, would that remain in the final budget? Would additional funds be allocated to provide for additional sponsorships? But then there would be a process after that, if there is undesignated funds, to review any requests for sponsorships to ensure that they meet those criteria.
I hear you. I guess that request is sort of like our community agency funding that we get and put in the budget.
It's similar. It's similar, but it's not a substitute for it, because the reporting requirements would be a little bit different, from the standpoint of, in the community agency funding process, an agency provides quarterly reports before they get a fourth of their funding.
Right.
Oftentimes with these events, we basically make the payment at one time with the understanding there's going to be certain recognitions provided for the city, and that after the event, a certain accounting of the use of the funds.
There is no, this is not time specific for an organization. So if a group is having an event in October, they can apply for funds. I didn't like that 30 days in advance because I think that's too tight. But they can still apply for funding even if they're not on the so-called list that we funded in the past. So they could fund, say, they make a request 2 months before their event to be considered.
They could do that, Councilmember Scipio, and there would be the internal review of the request. But again, I think that funding would still be the question, whether there are funds available to provide that sponsorship.
Councilman Clark.
Kind of along the same lines, I think what Mississippi may be alluding to is there may be folks out there that request funding but don't know it at budget time. So to put some contingency in there, would it be possible for you to provide all the folks that have gotten funding over the last few years so we would see examples?
It's in there.
Yes, sir.
Okay. And secondly, in-kind services, and I'm thinking of crowd control, police, or whatever. Is that kind of the same thing, or is that a different kind of request?
It would be similar. I mean, it is a cost to the city if we provide, police support for an event and we don't charge the organization for it. So again, I think there would be similar expectation about recognition, of what the city has done to support the event. That may be something too that is incorporated into the budget, as opposed to the way we have operated, where those particular departments have essentially covered those costs. It may be now more of a formal recognition that if we're going to provide support for a particular event, that needs to be included in that department's budget, because they really may not have the capacity to just cover it.
Okay.
One other aspect of this that we're also trying to address is this practice, if you will, of organizations reaching out to departments individually, requesting support for the same event. And then, and I think in our case, we want to make sure that the city is appropriately recognized for the level of sponsorship that they were providing. And if we provide a certain level of sponsorship, but then there's two other departments that are providing sponsorship where actually the city sponsorship is much greater, and the recognition for that should be acknowledged. So that's also part of what we're trying to address.
Okay, Mayor Pro Tem.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Rao. I think there's some other points that's going to have to be fleshed out, like you said, and to the point of Councilmember Clark and Scipio. Like the factor of community perception, who gets in and who doesn't. That's the thing about the list. I know you gave us a spreadsheet with some of the ones, organizations and events that have benefited from our sponsorship through the occupancy tax. And the community agencies basically are through community development, block grant, other things like that. I think we need to make sure the application process is very user-friendly, that it is out there, and we need to do our education piece. Again, when we change a policy or what people used to getting, they will tear this city up. They'll be mad at us. So what I'm asking you to do is make sure when we finally finalize this, or even maybe, I don't know, that it needs to get out there as to how this is going to be done, to give these organizations a chance to weigh in. Because we claim we want to engage them, we need to be transparent. We need to allow them an opportunity to weigh in, much like we did when we changed the community groups and how they respond to the community development block grant agencies. Again, I think we need to make sure we understand the pecking order of who gets in and who doesn't. Because we do have agencies, just like back in the past, before we changed our agency policy, the same agencies were getting all the money for decades. If we're going to do this, we just need to make sure maybe that we are very transparent and engage the community organizations that this gets out. We'd like to hear from you. What do you think about this? Thank you.
Yes, ma'am.
All right, we certainly have an opportunity over the next weeks or so to discuss, provide any information, ask questions of being going forward, and this comes back for a more formal action by the council. Okay. Thank you, Ben. Well done.
Thank you.
All right, that's all the items on our agenda. I want to recognize the city manager for an update.
Thank you. Just a couple of items to make sure council's aware of them going forward. One is in terms of looking at some dates that are coming up. This week, you do have the Commit to Civility program that I think the majority of you have signed up already to participate in. That's on Wednesday and is a part of what was talked about at the Essentials for Municipal Government as well. But also just to remind council, we do have the legislative breakfast this Friday at 8:30. That will be in the Utilities Conference Room. And immediately, and we'll have our state legislators there to hear about your legislative priorities for the year. Immediately following that, we will be doing a tour of city facilities to look at some of some city facilities and some city projects areas that are of importance, I think, to council, that you probably should be having some hands-on look at or eyes-on look at before you get into the strategic planning process that'll be happening the following week, as has been mentioned, on Wednesday the 29th and 30th. Ralph Tellis is the consultant that has been brought on to facilitate these sessions on those 2 days. And again, we are facilitating that, so it's a full day on Wednesday, starting I think at 8:30 in the morning, going through dinner. And after dinner, there will be an opportunity for us to have some discussion, particularly of some of the things that came out of the Essentials for New Elected Officials discussion from the council members that went to that. Two of the items I did provide back to you, the code of conduct that we've been discussing for a couple of months now, which is one of the items that was emphasized that needed to be adopted by council members in that, particularly as a new group coming together to form your norms. And the other piece of that one that we're still working on is rules of procedures, which is to simplify some of the codified items that you're doing in terms of how, from the organizational meeting to agendas to the rules of committees and the rules of council meetings, to get those informations in an easily accessible format for you that you can again adopt and use as a referral as you're going through your meeting processes. So it's going to be a busy next couple of weeks, and I just wanted to get those things in front of your in front of mind again today. I'd be glad to answer any questions.
Any questions, Mr. Pate? We get overtime for all of this next week.
Yes, you'll get it.
Okay, thank you. All right, that's all on our agenda. I would entertain a motion to adjourn.
For adjournment.
Is there a second? Second by Councilmember Joyner. All those in favor of adjourning, please say aye.
Aye.
Anyone opposed? We adjourn till 6 o'clock.